Hello and welcome to Bluepoint's webinar series, The Coaching Imperative. We're glad to have you join us today for session number 1, Beyond the Performance Appraisal. My name is Julie Henry, Director of Client Services, and before we get started today, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. First, I want to point out the control panel on your screen. The panel can be expanded or collapsed by using the white arrow in the orange box on the left. During today's webinar, you also have the choice of listening using your computer speakers, or you can dial in using your telephone. So go ahead and select the audio type that works best for you. Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Coaching Imperative, Beyond the Performance Appraisal. Our guide today is Gregg Thompson. Gregg is a keynote speaker, author, and executive leadership coach with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Bluepoint, Gregg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the development of leaders. Gregg is also the co-author of several books, including Unleashed, The Leader as Coach. Welcome, Gregg.
Thank you, Julie. I'm delighted to be here today. We have a very large group of participants from companies, both large and small, across North America, and a large international contingent as well. I'm delighted that the leaders of all levels have joined us. We have senior executives right through to first-line supervisors. Also pleased with the many coaches, leadership development specialists, and HR executives who are on the call with us today. That just really reflects the deep interest that many of us have in what's next, what after performance appraisal. So I'm honored to be speaking with you here today. When you look at this idea of performance appraisals, I have never been a fan of performance appraisals and been involved in conversations around the idea of performance appraisals for many years. I'm delighted with the trend of shifting away from the performance appraisal and moving somewhere else. And it's somewhere else that I'd like to discuss with you today. About 15 years ago, I was having a conversation with the senior executive of a very large corporation. He was a coaching client of mine, and we were talking about this idea of performance appraisals in his organization and organization effectiveness. I asked him this question. I said, when you look at this idea of performance appraisals and you look out on your organization, how much time and effort do you think your leaders invest in performance appraisals? And we did some calculations and looked at it, and he was thinking for a bit and thinking probably average performance appraisal would take about an hour, probably a couple of hours to do prep time for it, maybe a bit longer, so 3 to 4 hours. Probably about another 3 to 4 hours dealing with the fallout and the issues that came up from that. When you put that all together, looking at the average number of reports that individuals had at the time, somewhere between about 5 and 12, he calculated out several thousands of weeks were being invested in his organization every year in performance appraisals. Then I asked him the question, when you look at it, and what's your guess about what is the net impact of all those performance appraisals? Do you really think that that investment moves the dial at all on your organization effectiveness? In other words, are you a better organization because of those performance appraisals? Is it worth the investment? And he quickly came to the conclusion, no. Then I asked him the second question. Do you know anybody, any senior executive, any successful professional who attributes their success to a performance appraisal? And not one of them. Not one of them. He couldn't mention one of them. So it's very interesting. I'm thrilled that we're looking now at other ways of improving performance within our organization. We all know the things that have come from a culture of performance appraisal, negative experiences, poor execution, our timeliness is off. They're very subjective, and I'm not going to go through all the reasons why performance appraisals are on the decline in organizations. Many other authors and researchers have written on that. What I'd like to do to talk about today is what next. What do we need to do as organization leaders to really create this culture of high-performance learning and development within our teams and within our organization? Before I do that, I wanted just to put some context around this idea of leadership. I believe that leadership is everybody's business. I think that we need to invest in leadership development throughout our organizations. But I also believe that in many ways we've lost our focus, we've lost our way in organizations because we haven't differentiated the primary focus of leadership at different levels in the organization. And at the top, of the pyramid is our most senior leaders. And we believe that their focus, the primary focus for those leaders, should really be the alignment of the organization. They really should be getting all the arrows going in the same direction. I had a former partner, Boyd Clark, who would say that senior leadership, the holy grail of senior leadership, is getting that alignment, all those arrows going in the same direction. Then when you look at the middle area of the leadership of an organization, your middle manager up to division heads and the like, I really see those as the architects in the system. They design work, they design processes, they design jobs. Their role really is engagement, creating systems, processes, jobs, teams that are highly engaged around the core corporate strategies. And then when you move closer to the bottom and you look at team leaders and managers of managers, their prime focus as leaders needs to be high performance and learning. If you look at and what outcome you want from leaders at that level, it really is around that area of high performance. So I share that with you because that is our prime focus today. That is the leadership group that we really rely upon to move the ball, to push that stone up the mountain. And so as we look at helping them do that, that's when we move to this idea of leader as coach. So our agenda today, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about making that shift from a performance manager to a performance coach. What does that involve? I'm going to share with you some fairly high-level ideas and thinking around that. And hopefully this will help you prepare for your own plans to develop leaders who are effective in that coaching role. And secondly, then how do we equip them? How do we equip leaders to be coaches? And I'm going to share a lot of our experience. We've been training and developing coaches, leader coaches in Bluepoint for the last 15 or 20 years. We train thousands of coaches every year around the globe. And I'm happy to share with you some things we've learned about how you can best equip those coaches. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this idea of constructive confrontation, accountability, and feedback. Any system where you're trying to improve performance and trying to help leaders become more coach-like needs to deal with the issue of feedback, constructive confrontation, and accountability. And I want to share with you some of my thoughts on that. Then lastly, I'm going to talk on this idea of senior leaders. What's your job? And look at this idea of a culture of coaching. And it's really going to be a bridge into our next webinar, which is the second on this series. So the first module I want to talk about is this idea of making a shift from performance manager to performance coach. And that can be a very difficult shift. We have really created a breed of managers who have come from a reorganization, come from a constant change, continual change, and stress, and been given the task of creating more production, more information, more systems, more innovation, more creativity. And I think it's time for us to really give them the tools to actually bring that performance out in their teams. So here's a model that I find useful when you look at this idea of making the shift. So it really is shifting in many ways from the leader to the team member, shifting the agenda. And when I use the term agenda, I mean the work, the decisions, the responsibility, a person's career, their performance, the problem, the opportunity, the challenge, whatever it is, we call that the agenda. So when the leader owns it entirely, owns that agenda, he or she is directing. As we move more and more of the responsibility towards the team member, we move to advising, teaching, mentoring, and coaching. So you'll see out that continuum, the more we move to the right in that continuum, the more responsibility we are giving to the team member, and the more we're taking it away from the leader himself, herself. And so it is in this role, then we are asking them to be more coach-like. So why is that so hard? I think any good leadership development program starts out with the premise that this is very difficult. It can be very difficult for a leader to make that shift. It can be risky for them. They can lose stature. It takes time. It's a much more time-consuming endeavor. There's ego involved in it. When they're used to solving all the problems, when they're used to having the answers, when they're used to being the advisor, the outcomes could be certain. If you are functioning as a coach, you have a lot less control. And it is a personal investment. As I speak about a little bit later here, all coaching is personal. So what do we look for? What are we asking our leaders to shift towards? What qualities will make them successful? They need the ability to let go. They need the ability to turn responsibility over to others, to be patient, to have the courage, and to take the risks that are associated with coaching. You really need to have this desire, this passion to invest in others and a passion for their development. In many ways, coaching is an act of faith in others. I have a new book coming out. It's called The Master Coach, and I quote Boyd Clark, our former CEO, when he talked about leadership being an act of faith in others, and coaching really is that same act of faith. It's the ability to really hold others accountable for their own performance, accountable for their own careers. Tolerance. Do these words describe you? I would just like everybody on the webinar today, just take a moment and just to look at this slide and to think about it. Are these the words that people around you would use to describe you? If you can answer yes to those questions, you probably are functioning in a coach-like way today. If you cannot answer yes to the majority of those questions, you might want to think about what you might do in terms of your own professional and personal development planning to enhance your role as a coach. So I'd like to speak to you now about our second module, that is equipping leaders to coach. This is my passion. I would rather do nothing in my professional life than to help leaders become more coach-like, to become better coaches in the work that they do. This is how we as trainers and facilitators really make an indelible mark on organizations. We have found that once someone becomes a coach as a leader, there's no going back. There's really no going back because they see the power of coaching. They see how they can make this indelible mark on the careers and, yes, on the lives of others. So if you look at a leadership development program, there really needs to be two things that the program needs to have. This is how you should measure the program itself. Firstly, you need to be able to provide immediately usable coaching skills. All research tells us that if we don't provide immediately usable skills, then the program is really for naught. The investment is a waste. So immediately usable coaching skills, but secondly, and maybe more importantly, and we pride ourselves in Bluepoint on this second point, is that really helping leaders to become enthusiastic about coaching. In all of our workshops, we make sure that our participants experience success as a coach. They really understand that every one of us can coach, and we can coach effectively, and they get positive feedback on the things they're doing right as coaches. If a person doesn't leave a workshop or a program excited about the idea of coaching, seeing themselves as coaching, again, the training and development was for naught. So there's three key development elements that we need to look at if we're looking at equipping leaders to be better coaches. First of all, a coaching mindset, a different way of thinking about this idea of coaching. And so we look at coaching skills. There's a wide number of skills you can look at. We break it down into three areas: thinking like a coach, listening like a coach, and speaking like a coach. And I'm going to spend some time going through those three coaching skills. And lastly, it is the three coaching power tools. As you'll note here in just a moment, we look at coaching more as a flow, and we want to create a coach, a leader coach, who has the capability of going down many different pathways and have the capacity of having many kinds of conversations, many kinds of powerful conversations, as opposed to following one particular system. So it starts with this idea of a coaching mindset. Like, what is a coaching mindset? If you look at a lot of coaching programs, and good coaching programs that are being offered today, a number of them are systems-oriented. In other words, there's a certain number of questions you ask, there are a number of steps that you go through, and a process you always follow. I think these are great. I think they're really good to help us think about the kind of things we might want to consider in coaching, the way we might rely upon a process at certain points in the coaching conversation. But however, I really encourage you to think about this. If you look at a graduate of a program that is very, very linear, very, very step-by-step focused, what we tend to get is this. We tend to see the leader come. The leader comes back from those programs and starts zapping people with their coaching. You'll see it all the time, and it is ineffective. The problem with it is that the coaching is not something we do to other people. Coaching is something we do with other people. The problem with the step-by-step processes and systems in coaching is that they simply do not work. They do not work because natural human thinking, conversation, does not follow a sequential set of steps. Now again, there's some really good programs out there, such as the GROW model. I think very highly of the GROW model. It gives us a good way of thinking about the goals we want to achieve and what is the reality of the situation today, what options are ahead for us, and what's the way forward. I have all kinds of respect for that process, but it does not work in exclusive of a personal investment from the leader in the person that they're trying to coach. I would really encourage you to think about coaching as a flow. It is a flow that goes through a learning and discovery phase, an exploration and creation phase, and an action and execution phase. And the reason I like to think of it as a flow, and actually a flow will turn back on itself from time to time, is this idea that what we need to do is to go in the conversation where the most fertile ground is. And so rather than thinking about coaching as a step-by-step process, I would really encourage you to think about coaching as a conversational flow where we're always moving to the most fertile ground. When we talk about a mindset, a coaching mindset, I think what is most important is we divorce coaching from this idea that it is always a simple formal process that we have, especially to fix people. Remedial coaching is very ineffective, in fact. When we start thinking, we have a mindset that most leadership happens one conversation at a time. What that means is every conversation in the course of the day has the opportunity of being a coaching conversation. In our workshops, what we do very early on is encourage people to think back on a pivotal conversation or a person that had several conversations with them, and somebody who's had a real impact on them, somebody who has had a positive impact on their life, their career, their work in some way. And have them talk about, okay, what are the qualities of this person? What did they do? What made them special? What we find out is this. The same kind of things pop up all the time. Somebody encouraged me. Somebody really listened to me. Somebody took a risk on me. Somebody confronted me. Somebody told me things that other people would not. Somebody cared enough about me to confront me. Somebody challenged me, gave me a new perspective. Somebody invested in me. Somebody stretched me. Somebody told me a hard truth. Somebody saw something in me I couldn't even see in myself. I share this with you because a coaching mindset is really rooted in the fact that we've all been touched by other people. And coaching is not this thing we do off to the side somewhere that is one unique special skill. It is really a way of interacting in a positive way with other people, and we've all experienced it. The other piece of it from the coaching mindset is this. It is not the purview of senior leaders or people with coach on their business card, external professional coaches like myself. We all can do this. There's not one of us that can't do every behavior that's on this screen in the moment. It's about being more intentional about doing these things in our work every day. So when you boil all these down, there really are three dimensions for us as coaches. So I would encourage you to think about any leadership development, coach development program as addressing these three issues. At some point, we need to earn the right to be welcomed into a coaching conversation. A 5-step method may work perfectly well, but if you do not have the character, if you're not trusted, if you're not seen as a man or woman of integrity, you will not earn the right to come into that conversation. The ability to connect, to make a real live connection with people, not just a good relationship, but a connection where you are listened to, where you listen to others, where individuals will truly have conversations with you, conversations that are different, conversations that go down new, fresh roads, conversations that are emotional, conversations that deal with topics of disappointment, unrealized expectations, exciting opportunities, dreams, passions. The ability to have these conversations are the hallmark of the coach. So we call this a 3C model. I'd really encourage you to think about this as a way of looking at and designing a coach development program for the leader. It needs to address all three of these: the character of the leader, the ability to make connections, and the ability to have conversations that are different. If you look at the way we address conversations and deal with conversations through the course of a day, this here's another slide that I find particularly useful. When you look at all the things that can come at us as leaders, we call those the drivers. Unknown potential, you got a bigger job coming up, there are opportunities, underperformance, there's a critical assignment somebody's had, people just received, a person just received some disappointing feedback. All these things are happening every day within organizations, and we have the opportunity as leaders to have conversations about these things. We can challenge assumptions, we can help them develop options and new alternatives, we can simply help them reflect deeply on their issues. We can constructively confront people, they can be affirmed, we can give them some feedback, there's some insights. So the reason I share this with you is, again, in the coaching mindset, it tells us there's all kinds of options in the conversation, and the outcomes are potentially positive. So when we look at those outcomes down the right-hand side, high performance, renewed commitment, fresh pathways ahead. This here really is what we're looking for as an outcome from our coaching. So this here is a good schematic to keep in mind when we're looking at the broad impact of and the benefits of coaching. Let me share one more model with you that is in this coaching mindset as well, and we call it at Bluepoint the 3 modes of coaching. We encourage our leader coaches to think about coaching through three modes, 3 lenses. And the first one is formal ongoing coaching. We encourage our leader clients to always have at least one formal coaching relationship on the go at any one time. Always have one on the go. It's good for the other person, and it's really good for you. And this should be meeting with the person once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month even, and to have that continuous coaching conversation. I like to advise my clients to keep them going for at least 3 months. That's often how long it takes to make a significant change in performance or careers. And then secondly, just be aware that you can coach in the moment. A 30-second hallway conversation. I've spoken to many people who in a brief 30-second, 2-minute conversation received some feedback or insights or were challenged or were questioned in some way that helped them make a significant shift in their attitude, give them some really special insight in some way. And thirdly, just shifting to the right end of that continuum I showed you earlier, just becoming more universally a coach-like leader. Just taking that approach that you're not always going to be the person just telling people what to do or giving advice. You're really going to invest in others, helping other people to solve their own problems, challenging other people to step up to their own biggest game. So again, as we look at this idea of equipping leaders, we think there's 3 key coaching skills. I wanted to just talk about those briefly here today. We can look at a broad range of coaching skills and personal skills, but if you look at these 3, I would suggest that most of what we call broad coaching interpersonal skills and thinking skills can be broken down into 3 groups. Listen like a coach, think like a coach, and speak like a coach. So listen like a coach. Coaches listen differently. They listen much more deeply. You may have heard of the process of active listening, where the receiver paraphrases what he or she thought he said, sends it back to the sender, so the sender can confirm that the words were accurate, the meaning was accurate. Coaches listen far deeper than that. So good coaches will listen for aspirations. They'll listen for values. They'll listen for passions. They'll listen for inconsistencies. They'll listen for emotions. They'll listen for connections. So when you're really listening and you're mindful and you're fully present, that's the skill of the coach, is listening like a coach. Now, thinking like a coach is quite interesting as well. Helping people make that transformation from always being the person with the best idea in the room, person with the person of last resort, to thinking differently. And what coaches think about is this: the great coach recognizes that all they have is the now, the next moment ahead of them in the coaching conversation. That's all you have is now. That's the number one reason why a sequential step-by-step coaching process never works. It's because in that moment ahead, in that now, all we can do, the best way we can serve the talent, in Bluepoint we refer to the person being coached as the talent, is in this next moment, how can we best serve them? What can we do? Can we give them some feedback? Maybe it's a question. Maybe it's an affirmation. Maybe it's a confrontation. Maybe there's an insight we can share with them in the moment. and maybe it's nothing at all. So what we want to do is we want to equip coaches who are not following a step-by-step process, but rather have the capacity to make that decision in the moment so they can be most effective with the person that they are coaching. So how do they do that? What do they rely upon? We would assert that there's two things that they can rely upon. One is their intention, and their intention is this: what can I do, as I mentioned before, to be most effective in this moment? What can I do to be most effective in this moment? That's their intention. And we look to this term called noble intention. And then secondly, their intuition. It's trusting all that they've learned in their careers, all that they understand about human behavior and human performance, all that they have learned about the other person, and synthesizing that in some way. And so when you truly have what we call noble intention and are relying upon all your expertise, all your intuition, that is how we make our very best decisions as to what we can do next best for that person we're coaching. The third skill is to speak like a coach. And in a moment here, I'm going to talk to you about some coaching power tools. And we think that our ability to help the leaders have a suite of tools that helps them speak in ways that have a significant impact on others is one of the most important things we can do as developers. So the power tools for coaching conversations. I'm going to share with you a suite of power tools and some examples of the ones that we use in Bluepoint to help leaders really improve the effectiveness of their coaching conversations. I would really encourage you to think of these as not as prescriptive, but as filling your quiver. Filling your quiver. So the more arrows we can put into that quiver, the more the leader has to draw upon. We expect our leaders to be really good coaches, like right out of the gate. And we expect them to be functioning like professional coaches who have had 20 or 30 years of working with clients. Well, I can tell you, if you have 20 or 30 years of working with clients, you have a huge quiver of potentials, a huge quiver of questions, of insights, of opportunities for the coaching conversation. So what we want to do is, rather than equip the leader with a set of rules, we want to equip the leader with a set of tools that they can use and use their own intention and intuition to select the best tool in the moment. Here are three of those tools. The first one is what we call the tool of the big question. We provide leaders who attend our workshops a takeaway called the 60 big questions as a sample of some questions they might want to use in their work. And these questions tend to group into three dimensions. They follow the flow that I described earlier: discovery, creation, and commitment. And there really are questions that are not intended to solicit information. They are questions designed to challenge thinking, assumptions, and mental models in many ways. For instance, you might want a question that challenges people. What would happen if you really took your foot off the brake? Appreciated people. What can you do better than most everyone else? Broaden perspective. How would you describe your performance? Inspire. What's the most exciting outcome you can imagine? Confront. What sacrifices are you prepared to make? Build confidence. When you're at your best, what are you doing? Deepen commitment. What promises will you make to others? So when you think about this idea of questions, the more we are able to give the kind of coaching questions to our leaders, the more capacity they have to challenge, to affirm, to confront, to help the person they're coaching, the talent, really expand their field of possibilities, to help them think through and maybe even challenge their beliefs and assumptions. The second power tool is this tool we call the 12 coaching pathways. What this tool is intended to do is to equip leaders with options as to where they might want to take the coaching conversations. Where is that most fertile ground? And especially if we have a relatively new leader who has not done a lot of coaching, I've got a lot of feedback that they find this incredibly valuable, not in being prescriptive, but in giving them a suite of options that they might want to think about when having a coaching conversation. In other words, for example, they might be having a conversation with somebody when really all their intuition is screaming that this person really needs to envision a much bigger goal for themselves. They can do so much more than they are right now. They might need to align their behavior and energy more with their values. If you hear them continually selling out on themselves, the pathway that the coach might select is to help people to stop selling themselves short. if they're having a conversation and they continue to hear the person blaming others for their lack of success, the coaching conversation may want to be in the area of self-accountability. Many of us are avoiding some kind of difficult action. Most of us have a conversation out there somewhere that we know if we have it, things will get better, but we're avoiding to have that conversation. Maybe as a coach, you're sensing that, and you can challenge the person to really take those actions that they need to take. Maybe they're not using all their talents, and maybe there's some talents that have been held in exile, and that you need to really bring those talents in. Maybe that they're really not being honest with themselves, and they really need to face up to reality. Maybe that they have narrowed their point of view so much that the entire coaching conversation should be around gaining some fresh perspectives in some way. If there's a real sense of negativity in the conversation, maybe challenge them to choose optimism, choose confidence, and choose their own happiness might be the pathway. Oftentimes we'll find people who have gone through lots of ups and downs in their lives and in their careers are still living in the past and living in their mistakes and living in their failures. And it's helping them move past that, moving to some new frontiers. And maybe there's all kinds of complex things happening in their lives, and just helping them integrate all these competing aspects of their life might be the best pathway. Or clarifying boundaries. Maybe they have difficulty separating work and play. Maybe they have difficulties with boundaries of what's theirs and what is not theirs. So this suite of coaching pathways, we like to provide the participants in our workshops to help them fill their quiver. The last quiver filling tool is what we call key conversation interventions. And I'm going to go through these rather quickly. These here, all these tools I'm going to deal with in much more depth when we get to the third webinar called the Master Coach. And so you'll note as we go through these 10 that many of them are ones that would require a fair amount of courage, interpersonal skills, and faith both in yourself as a coach and faith in the person that you are coaching. And these are interventions that you might just drop into the conversation when your intuition is screaming that something different needs to happen. So maybe it's an intense inquiry. Maybe you just need to really drive down and challenge in a very intense way an assumption, a belief. Maybe something needs to be really reframed. Maybe that there's a past failure that needs to be looked at differently. Maybe there's an opportunity in the future that really could be reframed into something much more positive. Maybe in the moment there's some feedback that you really believe would be helpful for this person to hear. Maybe simply paraphrasing what they have been saying and feeding that back to the person. Oftentimes in a coaching conversation, people will declare the impossible, and maybe it's challenging that. Maybe it's challenging what their perception of impossible is, and to start looking at what really is unimaginable. In those of you who are familiar with strategic planning processes, there is a scenario planning process that is very helpful to get people to start really preparing for the future and gaining the confidence by looking at the uncertainties before those uncertainties occur. Sometimes it's just silence. Sometimes it's spending time in reflection. Sometimes it's really taking an appreciative approach. Maybe your sense as a coach is the person just really needs to be honored for their strengths, what's really good in their lives. What are those opportunities ahead for them? It can be this thing we call challenging constraints. Most achievements, if not all achievements, have been done in the face of constraints. And so it's about looking at constraints as your friend, as the opportunity for success, as opposed to roadblocks. Possibly is just simply some type of visualization. Probably really looking at what is the very best that can happen from the circumstance. As I mentioned, my hope is that you'll rejoin me for the third seminar, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of how, as a coach, we can move into those areas. We can walk down those roads, those pathways, how we can make those interventions that are most helpful to others. I did want to spend just a little bit of time on this idea of constructive confrontation, accountability, and feedback. The reason being is there is no replacement for performance appraisal without this idea of having information free-flowing within the organization. And in fact, constructive confrontation may be the greatest gift we have at all. Maybe it's the greatest gift we give as leaders and as coaches. And I can tell you, it is very, very poorly done in most organizations. It is very poorly done. We avoid it like a plague. And when we do it very poorly. Here's the classical cycle that I see happening in many organizations, and I, quite frankly, I see it happening in myself. We have unmet expectations, or somebody doesn't meet our expectations, or there's interpersonal failure in some way. And then that generates some kind of disappointment, and then we're frustrated, and then there's some disillusionment, and then we get mad, then we get angry. And so then it pops up in conflict or a pervasive distrust. So this is a constant cycle. So obviously when you look at this, what we want to do is you want to nip that off in the bud. We want to nip it off when there's unmet expectations or interpersonal failure. We want to be able to nip that off right away. And if we're going to replace performance appraisal with something, we need to replace it with a culture of feedback, a culture of constructive confrontation, and I assert a culture of personal accountability. Because in organizations, when we fail to confront, it just runs underground anyway. It's not going to go away. The disappointment, the anger that flows from it doesn't go away. It's just going to pop up somewhere else. We're going to have that explosion eventually anyway. I would suggest that this all starts with this idea of accountability. The problem with accountability is it's used as code in many organizations as a label for poor performance. You'll hear it all the time. We've got to hold people more accountable around here. We got to get the poor performers. We've got to make people stand and be accountable. Accountability should be seen as a gift. When we hold people accountable, what we're saying is you are important. What the leader can do, and the problem is we start by trying to hold other people accountable. I think that's wrong. I think the best way to build this culture of accountability within an organization is the leader and the coach model it. They have this idea that all accountability starts with this one statement: I own it, and it is a specific outcome. I will act on it, and I will answer for it. And it's continually doing that. It's continually modeling it. Yes, I've got that. I will take that. I'll act on that. I will answer for that. And so for us as leaders, the two big questions that are facing us are this: do you care enough about your organization and your business to hold people accountable for the outcomes they agreed to deliver? Do you care enough? And then secondly, do you care enough about others to share with them the information they need in order to change? These are two simple but very, very profound questions. There are 5 critical principles around this idea of providing feedback that I think we need to understand. And the first one requires a significant shift in us as leadership development specialists. Number 1, the leadership imperative is shift away from giving to inviting. Here is the problem. When we focus our efforts on the giver, when in fact the receiver has all the power. We are teaching our leaders how to give effective feedback. Time it right, sandwich it, and it has very, very little impact. What we need to do is to teach people to receive feedback, to honor feedback, and to value feedback. But it's not easy. It's very difficult. As we shift from focus on providing effective feedback to teaching our team members to receive effective feedback, it requires an enormous input, enormous risk, enormous courage on our part. And I'll explain why. As we move from teaching the giver to teaching the receiver, the only way we can do that is by modeling it ourselves. It's about asking for feedback and about teaching other people how to process that feedback. Secondly, all feedback is personal. Think about this. What is your usual reaction if your computer tells you that your hard drive is nearly full? Well, if you're like me, you're thankful. You increase attention, concern, you take action, and you're thankful for doing that. When's the last time your spouse has told you you're driving too fast? What's your likely response? An emotional spike? Being somewhat defensive? Reluctant to take action? A little resentful? Every one of us has experienced that on the right-hand side. So what's the difference? Well, one is the computer is telling us, and we're thankful for that. The other is somebody we care about is telling us, and we're resentful. I share this with you because there's no such thing as it's only business. All feedback is personal. And appreciation is one of our most powerful tools as leaders and as coaches. And I don't mean that by flattery. We all know what flattery is, and it is not appreciation. It is, we can tell when it's coming, and we can tell when it's not sincere, and we can tell when it is superficial. Real appreciation, we sense it right away. It's genuine, it's been well researched, and it's specific. When I hear these terms, my manager does not give me any feedback, I always think of this one thing. It doesn't mean my manager doesn't give me feedback. It usually means I want someone to care about me at work. When you look at a child, when a child is not getting attention, what does a child say? Daddy, Daddy, look at me. From very early age, we want to be seen. And giving feedback, giving appreciative feedback in the organization allows people to be seen. The most important message that any of us want when we get feedback is you matter to me. It's really interesting. Right up to the very highest levels of the organization, people need to know that they matter. Lastly, or fourthly, accountability is not about being tough. It's about being caring. And this is the message we need to deliver and share with our leaders. The problem is it's delivered as if you've got to get tougher with your people. It's not. You have to care more about your people. You need to care enough about them to confront them. Care enough about them to give them the kind of information they need to succeed. So lastly, I want to just talk a little bit about senior leaders. Okay, what's your job in all of this? In the next webinar, I'm going to be talking about this idea of creating a coaching culture. But what I wanted to do here today is just to provide a bridge to that session, is to share with you what we consider to be the characteristics of a coaching culture. What are those organizations like who truly have a coaching culture, have a high-performance culture? And we believe it is a senior leader's job as the organizational architect to put in place those things that encourage, demand, and equip an organization to have this thing we call a coaching culture. A coaching culture is defined by 7 things, we believe. Firstly, personal and organizational learning is greatly valued. And this thing cannot be faked. You can always tell when an organization really, really values new information. They have what we call premeditated agility. This is going to sound odd, but what premeditated agility is the assumption that you are wrong. You make the very best plans you can, but you assume you'll be wrong to some degree. And that means you'll be open to learning. When we do not assume we are wrong to some degree, we will close out information. Disconfirming information will be automatically shut out. So my encouragement to you is think about this. Do you have what we call premeditated agility? Secondly, are people excited about their personal and professional development opportunities? Do people talk about it? Are people enthralled about what's next for them? What other opportunities are they in the organization? How can they move? How can they learn more? What can they do differently? How can they contribute in a different way? And leaders themselves are seen as trustworthy, selfless, and competent. Trustworthy, selfless, and competent. Would those words, if you were a senior leader listening today, would those words be used to describe you? And one of the ones that I think is the most important, if you're going to have a culture of coaching, promises are readily made and faithfully kept. Promises are readily made and faithfully kept. When you do this, you need very little inspection within the organization. The reason being, you know people will get stuff done or they'll die trying. When you go into an accountability-based organization and people are clear on the promises they've made to other people, which is really accountability for outcome, you have very little reporting. You have very little inspection because you know people are deeply committed to getting it done. If they say they're going to do it, they're going to get it done. And I deliberately use the term promises. In our family, we don't talk about deliverables. We don't give deliverables to each other. We make promises to each other. The reason leaders tend not to like that word promises often is because it's a pretty personal word. When you talk about making a promise to somebody, you're making a personal pact with that person. So I'd encourage you to think about that. Does that describe the culture of your organization? And our difficult conversations routine. We tend to avoid conversations that are emotional, that deal with personal accountability, that talk about disappointment, that deal with personal differences of view. We tend to want to keep conversations at what we call this business level. If you look at an organization, a team that is high performing, they make a commitment to have the difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. And this is one that surprises many people and takes many of us aback a bit when we look at what our relationships are like around the table. If you are a senior leader, I would encourage you to think about the senior leadership team on which you sit. Often, I coach a lot of very senior executives in wonderful organizations, and often there's this healthy or unhealthy degree of competition at that level. Do you really take delight in the success of others? And that term is intentionally worded in that way. Are you thrilled when you see your colleagues succeeding, being promoted, doing great work in the organization, even if it's greater than yours? Can you contribute to their success and get none of the credit? When that is happening, then you'll know that you are a coach and a coach-like leader, and you are in an organization that is coach-like. And seventh, well-intentioned feedback flows freely throughout the team or organization. Well-intentioned feedback flows freely throughout the team or organization. If we look at this idea of feedback as being the lifeblood of the organization, it is the lifeblood of coaching. It will spark all kinds of great coaching conversations, and it needs to be honored. The flames need to be fanned throughout the organization. And the way we can best do that is not by teaching our leaders how to give feedback, but by showing people throughout the organization how to process that feedback. So in our next webinar, I'm going to talk about this list of 7 coaching characteristics of a coaching culture, and talk a little bit about what senior leaders can do and some of the difficult decisions and how they can prioritize their effort and energy and their own professional development plans to have a powerful influence on their culture. I'd like to share with you just a couple of ideas about this idea of coaching yourself, creating a coaching culture within the organization, training and developing coaches within the organization. It is not like learning an accounting system. Coaching is really, great coaching is a career-long journey. There is not a destination. You never get to be a great coach. You never get there. There's no such thing. Even those people that we think are great coaches, if you talk to them, they're ordinary men and women like us who are choosing every day to get up and do the kind of things that great coaches do. So it's much more about a journey, a direction. The cool thing about it is every one of us can do it. There's nothing here that we can't do. Every one of us can get up tomorrow morning and encourage somebody. Really listen to somebody. Challenge somebody. Help people identify their own strengths and talents in ways they never did before. See something in somebody else they can't even see in themselves. These are the things that great coaches do. It's my hope that I was able to share some perspectives with you today as to how you might plot out and plan for your next chapter, both as a leader and as a professional, as a team member, and as an organization. I am looking forward to the future seminars and working through with you the idea of coaching at a deeper level. I'll now turn it over to Julie.
Thanks, Greg. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we want to remind you again, as Greg said, that this is just the first in a series of webinars on the coaching imperative. We invite you to visit our website to register for session number 2, Creating a Coaching Culture, which will take place on March 15th, and session number 3, Developing Master Coaches, which will take place on April 19th. If the development of a strong coaching culture is a goal for your organization this year, we do encourage you to learn more about Bluepoint's Leader as Coach program. It's a practical, highly experiential workshop designed to help leaders excel at coaching others for high performance. As with all of our Bluepoint programs, it is fully customizable and can be offered as a blended learning program with in-person, virtual, and self-directed learning activities. As always, for more information about Bluepoint, we invite you to connect with us on social media, and we encourage you to visit the resources section of our website for more leadership videos, articles, and webinars. You can find us at bluepointleadership.com. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.